Your life on Earth has come to an end.
So, this is it. I believed in you.
You have finished your life.
I trusted your mercy.
Yes.
I knew you would forgive.
I have faced the abyss, and I stand before you now, assured of my redemption.
You expected mercy.
Isn't that faith?
It is, but faith is revealed through action.
Please, help me. Forgive me, I didn't mean to.
Just give me a chance.
What are you showing me?
These are the moments when mercy was asked of you.
Why won't you answer me? I just want forgiveness.
Wait, please, just let me explain. It wasn't my fault, not entirely. I beg you.
You trusted my mercy, but you did not practice it. This is the judgment.
Have you ever wondered if trust in mercy? It's the same as to live mercy. Perhaps you watched those scenes thinking he made few or almost no mistakes. He believed, he trusted, he had faith. And yet, something began to crumble before him, final judgment. Because this judgment is not built on speeches nor on declared beliefs, but on repeated choices throughout life. He viewed divine mercy as a safe haven, a guaranteed right, without realizing that mercy is not merely something one expects to receive, but something one chooses to practice, especially when it comes at a cost. Before we move on, I invite you to do not play this video automatically. This content requires attention, awareness, and inner honesty. What is being revealed here is not a distant story, it is a silent mirror. If at any point you feel discomfort, do not ignore it. This is part of the process of understanding what is being shown. Write in the comments one word that summarizes what has touched you most so far, such as compassion, faith, or omission. This strengthens reflection and helps others to recognize themselves as well. If this topic resonates with you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because what follows further deepens this truth that many prefer not to face. He began by telling himself that faith was enough, not like someone praying silently seeking meaning, but like someone wearing an invisible vest to get through life without getting too involved. Believing became an emotional shortcut, an elegant way to avoid responsibility. He repeated beautiful words, quoted promises, spoke of mercy as if talking about a guaranteed benefit, something that would be there at the end, regardless of the path taken. At that point, faith ceased to be an encounter and became a shield against guilt, against the discomfort of looking the other in the eye, against the silent demand to act when acting costs money. Little by little, he began to confuse faith with personal security. For him, believing came to mean being protected from the consequences, protected from judgment, protected even from his own conscience. Whenever something required a more difficult choice, he retreated into this comfortable belief. He told himself that God understood, that the heart mattered more than actions, that intentions were enough. But intentions don't feed the hungry, don't defend those who suffer injustice, don't welcome those who have been left behind. Even so, he continued to use faith as a soft cushion between himself and reality. The problem was never about believing. The problem was using belief as a substitute for presence. When someone needed time, he offered words. When someone needed to be listened to, he offered spiritual explanations. When someone needed concrete mercy, he offered silence disguised as respect. Everything seemed very elevated, very correct, very aligned with a spiritual discourse, but something essential was missing. involvement, mercy, not as a concept, but as a gesture, not as an abstract idea, but as a movement towards the other. He considered himself a good person because he didn't explicitly do evil. He never yelled, never hit, never stole, but he also never put himself in the place of those who lay fallen by the wayside. He would pass by, observe from afar, feel a slight pang, and then reassure himself with the idea that everyone has their own journey. This phrase became another shield, a sophisticated way to remain distant, without seeming indifferent. Faith at this stage no longer illuminated, it anesthetized. Over time he began to believe that mercy was something received, not something practiced, a divine favor reserved for the end of the story, something that would erase mistakes, omissions, and absences. This belief created a strange inversion. He demanded understanding for himself, but had difficulty offering understanding to others. He asked for patience with his own failings, but became irritated by the fragility of others. He spoke of unconditional love, but only approached when it was comfortable. Faith became an impeccable discourse, sustaining a life increasingly protected from real contact. And perhaps the most delicate point is this: he truly believed he was on the right path. There was no conscious cynicism, there was self-deception. A deception fueled by beautiful words, by repeated ideas, by a spirituality that never descended from thought to action. He felt secure because he believed, prepared because he knew the correct terms, calm because he was never a bad person. But judgment doesn't ask what you believed in, but what you did with what you claimed to believe in. This confusion grew almost imperceptibly. Each small omission seemed irrelevant in isolation. A plea for help ignored here, a conversation avoided there, suffering downplayed with ready-made phrases. Nothing seemed serious enough to provoke change. Faith continued to function as a moral buffer, reducing the impact of any internal discomfort. There was always a spiritual justification available, always an explanation that kept intact the image of someone correct, balanced, at peace. The curious thing is that the more he spoke of mercy, the less merciful he became in his daily choices. He became rigid without realizing it, demanding of others' behavior, indulgent with himself. He began to judge others by visible results, while evaluating himself only by his stated intentions. This silent difference created distance, cooled bonds, weakened relationships. Yet he called this spiritual maturity, as if detachment were synonymous with elevation. There was also hidden fear. To truly act would require leaving one's comfort zone, risking mistakes, engaging with pain that could no longer be ignored. Faith, used as a shield, avoided precisely that. It avoided contact with one's own vulnerability and the vulnerability of others. It avoided the emotional cost of mercy, because mercy always costs something. It costs time, it costs energy, it costs pride, it costs control. At that point, belief ceased to transform and became merely protective. It protected an identity, a personal narrative, a feeling of being on the right side without having to navigate the difficult terrain of concrete ethical choices. Belief worked, but only to maintain the status quo. Nothing was deeply questioned. Nothing was confronted. Everything was softened by a discourse that sounded correct, but which produced no visible results. Perhaps this is where the question begins to gain weight. Not a question posed to frighten, but to reveal. What happens when faith serves only to spare us and never to move us? When mercy is expected but not practiced? When spirituality consoles but does not transform? This type of reflection is unsettling because it removes the shield. And without the shield, all that remains is what was lived, what was done, what was avoided. If at any point you recognize this mechanism, even slightly, mark it in the comments with something simple, like emotional shield, faith that numbs, or I'm seeing it. It's not a public response. It's an internal sign that something has been touched, because it's precisely from this point that we move forward. There's a subtle line between trusting and hiding. He crossed it without realizing it, as many do. Trust should expand the capacity to love, not reduce it. It should open eyes, not close them. When faith becomes a shield, it prevents real encounters, prevents simple gestures, prevents the silent act of mercy that no one applauds but that changes destinies. This is the point of tension that remains suspended now, waiting to be looked at, without haste, without defense, without ready-made answers. And it is in this uncomfortable space that the story breathes, because nothing is resolved yet. Nothing has been closed. Nothing has been absolved. and the weight of what was avoided is only beginning to become perceptible. The silence that remains is not empty. It is expectation. It is internal confrontation. It is the feeling that something essential will still be asked. This moment stretches on, as if time awaits an answer that has yet to come. Everything remains suspended, precisely where consciousness begins to awaken. Now, here. When someone finally approached and asked for help, it wasn't anything grand. It wasn't a dramatic request, nor an exaggerated demand. They were simple, human things, almost timid. A request for attention, a request for time, a request to be listened to. Sometimes it was just someone saying, "I'm not feeling well," and expecting to stay there for a few minutes without spiritual explanations, without ready-made advice, without catchy phrases. But he always had something more important to do, something more urgent, something that justified the postponement. Mercy in those moments was always delayed, not explicitly denied, but pushed aside until it disappeared. He would hear the request, sense the discomfort, and quickly seek an elegant way out. He would say it wasn't the best time, that the person needed to be strong, that everyone needs to resolve their own issues. Deep down, he believed he was being mature, balanced, rational. He didn't realize that behind these responses lay a silent refusal to get involved. Mercy demands presence, and presence demands emotional availability. That was exactly what he was avoiding. Meanwhile, he continued to expect infinite understanding from God for his failings, his absences, and his internal excuses. There was a stark contrast between what he expected to receive and what he offered. When he erred, he asked for mercy. When he felt weak, he asked for understanding. When he failed, he trusted that everything would be forgiven in the end. But when the other person erred, when the other person faltered, when the other person was in need, he became distant, analytical, cold. Not out of conscious malice, but due to a distorted internal logic where mercy was a personal right, not a daily practice. This imbalance became an invisible pattern, repeated so many times that it no longer attracted attention. Some people tried more than once. They came back, insisted, gave clear signs of tiredness, pain, and loneliness. He noticed but chose not to delve deeper. He thought that getting too involved would create dependence, drama, and weariness. He preferred to maintain clean, organized relationships without emotional excesses. The problem is that human relationships don't work that way. Mercy isn't organized, it isn't efficient, it isn't comfortable. It invades schedules, messes up priorities, and exposes vulnerabilities. That's why he avoided it, while continuing to ardently desire it for himself. In his silent prayers, he spoke of justice tempered with mercy. He hoped for a compassionate judgment, attentive to intentions, sensitive to circumstances. He trusted that everything he failed to do would be understood. But in his daily life, he didn't apply that same lens to others. He judged behaviors, interpreted mistakes as choices, pain as exaggerations. The yardstick changed depending on the side. For himself, context. For others, demands. This pattern created a distance between discourse and practice that he never truly confronted. What's most disturbing is that many of these ignored requests were small. They didn't require extreme sacrifices. An answered phone call, a visit, a respectful silence instead of advice. None of that seemed big enough to justify the change. Precisely for that reason, it accumulated. Each small "not now" became an undeclared "never." Each postponement built a parallel story, invisible to him, but very clear to those who needed it. Denied mercy rarely makes a sound. It simply disappears, leaving a void that is difficult to name. Meanwhile, he continued to hope that at the decisive moment, all mercy would be granted him. He expected to be welcomed, understood, forgiven. He believed that his heart was good, that his intentions were pure, that this would count more than concrete actions. This expectation reassured him. It acted as a moral sedative. But it also created a selective blindness, where he failed to realize that the mercy one hopes for is the same mercy one learns through practice. At times, a strange feeling would arise, a slight discomfort, almost an internal question, something like, could I have done more? But he would quickly suppress it with rational justifications. He would say that he couldn't carry everyone's burden, that he needed to protect himself, that helping too much could also be harmful. He used correct concepts to support a posture devoid of practical compassion. Thus mercy remained a value defended but rarely lived. This inconsistency didn't appear all at once. It was built up slowly, in small, seemingly harmless choices. That's why it's so difficult to recognize. He didn't see himself as someone who refused to help. He saw himself as someone prudent, balanced, and spiritual. But prudence without mercy becomes coldness. Spirituality without compassion becomes mere rhetoric, and balance without love becomes emotional distance disguised as maturity. Now this contrast is becoming impossible to ignore. The expectation of mercy finds its mirror reflected in mercies refused, not as an explicit accusation, but as a silent weight, an accumulation of moments when someone reached out and found absence. This weight doesn't scream, doesn't condemn, it simply remains. It is on this weight that conscience begins to touch, still without an answer, still without defense. If this resonated with you, write something in the comments that represents this contrast, such as selective mercy, I expected more than I gave, or simply, this hurt. These words help mark the exact point where we go from here, because it is from this recognition that the next layer begins to reveal itself, slowly without immediate relief, keeping everything open exactly as it needs to be now. He chose a religion without cost because anything that demanded real commitment seemed excessive. For him, faith needed to fit into his routine without altering priorities, without generating internal conflicts, without touching on sensitive areas of life. Anything that threatened comfort was quickly reinterpreted as excess, fanaticism, or unnecessary demands. Spirituality became a cushioned space, made to reassure, not to confront. It was possible to speak of God, of love, of mercy, as long as none of this required concrete change, renunciation, loss, or emotional strain. He believed that true faith shouldn't hurt. If it started to bother him, something was wrong. If it generated tension, guilt, or effort, it was a sign of imbalance. Thus, he built a light, pleasant, weightless spirituality. He prayed when he felt like it, helped when he had extra energy, and only got involved to the point where he still felt in control. Any deeper calling was elegantly ignored. He called this discernment, but in practice it was fear of leaving his comfort zone. At this stage, religion became a service of emotional comfort. It was there to offer peace, not to demand responsibility, to soothe the conscience, not to transform it. He felt good about himself because he didn't get involved in conflicts, didn't wear himself out with other people's problems, didn't let himself be affected. Avoiding involvement seemed like maturity. Preserving oneself seemed like wisdom. But mercy without involvement becomes spiritualized distance. Whenever a situation demanded continuous presence, prolonged patience, or some kind of personal sacrifice, he would back down. Helping someone for too long was seen as a waste of energy. Staying by the side of someone suffering was considered too burdensome. He preferred quick interventions, punctual gestures, actions that yielded a sense of accomplishment without lasting. Emotional cost. Faith needed to be practical but not compromised, beautiful but not demanding, inspiring but not transformative. This comfortable spirituality had implicit rules. Don't get too involved, don't feel too much, don't take on too much responsibility. Everything needed to be balanced so as not to affect personal well-being. He talked a lot about boundaries, but rarely about surrender. He talked about love, but little about sacrifice. He talked about mercy, but avoided any situation where it would cost something real. Thus, religion fit perfectly into his existing lifestyle without requiring a revision of values or choices. The problem is that this faith without cost created a dangerous logic. He came to believe that avoiding conflict was a spiritual virtue, that not getting involved was a sign of emotional intelligence, that preserving comfort was a sign of inner balance. Because of this, whenever someone demanded more than he was willing to give, he would distance himself with spiritual justifications. He would say he needed to take care of himself, that he couldn't carry burdens that weren't his, that everyone has their own cross to bear. Correct phrases used to justify a constant absence. Meanwhile, the idea of sacrifice seemed outdated, almost offensive. Sacrifice sounded like guilt, burden, obligation. He preferred a positive, light, motivational faith, something that boosted self-esteem, not something that questioned attitudes, something that confirmed he was already okay, not something that suggested change. This spirituality functioned as a gentle mirror, never as a demanding call. And he liked that. He felt at peace, secure, aligned with his own image of someone conscious. But there was a troubling detail. The more comfortable his faith became, the more distant he became from real suffering, less sensitive to the suffering of others, less available to listen without haste, less willing to stay when there was no immediate emotional return. Religion without cost protected him from burnout, but also distanced him from deep human connection. Everything remained clean, organized, controlled. But true mercy is rarely clean or organized. It involves confusion, repetition, weariness, and frustration. He skillfully avoided that kind of involvement. He knew exactly how far to go while still appearing to be a good person. He did enough to keep his own narrative intact, but never enough to feel truly exhausted. Faith served as the ultimate justification. If someone demanded more presence, he would say he was at peace with God. If someone pointed out his absence, he would say that everyone needs to respect their limits. Thus, everything closed without external conflict, but with a growing emptiness. This comfortable spirituality didn't generate difficult questions. It didn't provoke a review of attitudes. It didn't place the other at the center. It was a faith tailor-made to cost nothing. And precisely for that reason, it didn't produce visible fruits of practical mercy. Everything remained correct in discourse, but shallow in experience. Sacrifice was always theoretical, never lived. Surrender was always symbolic, never concrete. If you notice this pattern, write something in the comments that translates it, such as comfortable faith, religion without cost, or I avoided the stress. These words help mark the point where consciousness begins to realize that a spirituality that demands nothing may also not. Prepare for what is yet to come, because it is precisely from here that we continue, with this discomfort still open, without relief, without a ready answer, only with the feeling that something essential has been avoided for too long. He began repeating the phrase almost unconsciously. It wasn't my responsibility. At first it sounded like just a rational thought, a way of setting boundaries, of avoiding responsibilities that theoretically didn't belong to him. Over time, this phrase became an automatic mechanism. Whenever something required action, presence, or a decision, it would surface as an internal reflex. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't harsh, it was logical, and that's precisely why it seemed correct. Transferring responsibility gave a sense of balance, of justice, of order, everything in its place, each person with their role, and he, protected from any involvement that could cause strain. There was always someone more suitable, someone more prepared, closer, more capable, more responsible. He easily convinced himself of this. If someone was suffering, there was a professional. If someone needed a listening ear, there was a better friend. If someone needed support, there was family. He always positioned himself one step behind, observing, analyzing, evaluating, not out of declared coldness, but out of a deep belief that acting outside his designated role was interfering too much. Thus, omission presented itself as prudence, distance as respect, absence as maturity. This logic seemed flawless. After all, taking on everything would be impossible. Carrying the weight of the world would be unsustainable. He considered himself conscious, centered, emotionally intelligent, but in practice, this constant transfer of responsibility created a pattern of escape. Escape not from chaos, but from the silent call that arises when someone crosses our path in a fragile state. Escape from the simple question, what if it were you? What if, at that specific moment, the responsibility wasn't formal but human? Gradually, he grew accustomed to viewing difficult situations as external problems, something that needed to be solved by systems, institutions, other people, never by him. When someone expected a gesture, he offered an explanation. When someone awaited his presence, he offered guidance. Everything seemed organized, functional, correct. But something essential was missing: moral involvement. Not the kind that saves the world, but the kind that bends. Down, that commits, that accepts the discomfort of being present, even without a guarantee of results. The omission took on a respectable appearance. He said he didn't want to interfere, that he didn't want to overstep boundaries, that he didn't want to create dependency. Beautiful words, current concepts, arguments difficult to refute. Who could say he was wrong? After all, no one is obligated to do anything, and that's precisely where the danger lies. When everything is reduced to what is formal obligation, the space for mercy disappears, because mercy is never born from obligation. It is born from choice. He began to evaluate each situation through this lens, He would first ask himself if it was his responsibility. If the answer was no, he felt liberated. His conscience calmed. The tension disappeared. The problem moved on, now belonging to someone else. This repeated dynamic created a constant feeling of being right, but also a growing detachment from his own humanity. Because being human is not just about fulfilling duties, it's about responding to encounters. On many occasions, he realized he could have done something simple, not something heroic, not something grand. Just be there, just call, just stay a few more minutes. But then, the internal justification would surface. It wasn't my fault, I didn't cause it, I'm not prepared, I don't have time. And so, omission became a way of life. Always clean, always polite, always defensible, never violent, but profoundly absent. This logic also fueled a silent comparison. He positioned himself outside the center of the scene and observed who took charge, who became worn out, who got too involved. Often he judged these people as impulsive, emotional, unbalanced. He felt above this movement, like someone who had learned not to get lost in other people's problems. But along with the excess, he also discarded the essential, the ability to respond when no one else does, to act when everyone else passes the buck. The phrase, "it wasn't my responsibility," became an ethical shield, a final argument that ended any possibility of further exploration. There was no guilt, no conflict, no questioning. Everything seemed resolved before it even began. But this premature resolution had an invisible cost. Each responsibility transferred was also a lost opportunity to exercise concrete mercy. Each step back was a departure from the practice of love that he claimed to value. What was most unsettling was that this stance didn't bring complete relief. At times, a discomfort would arise, a quick, almost imperceptible thought, something like, maybe I could have done things differently, but he quickly stifled it with the same logic. It wasn't my job, it wasn't my role, it wasn't my obligation. Thus his conscience remained silent, not because it was at peace, but because it was trained not to insist. This way of living creates a risk-free spirituality, a faith that observes but doesn't get involved, a morality that analyzes but doesn't act. Everything becomes theoretically correct, but emotionally empty. Omission, disguised as prudence, becomes invisible even to those who practice it. And when that happens, the problem is no longer the mistake made, but the good avoided, that which could have been done and never was. If this logic has crossed your mind, write something in the comments that represents it, such as, "It wasn't my responsibility, I shifted the blame," or "I hid behind prudence." These words aren't a public confession, they're an internal marker, because it's precisely at this point that the story continues, with this tension still unresolved, with this question still unanswered, awaiting the next move. There were people who simply stayed behind. They didn't disappear suddenly. They didn't break off dramatically. They didn't create visible conflicts. They faded away, one by one, as if they understood there was no space for them to remain. Faces he knew, stories he heard, halfway through pains that were mentioned and then never revisited, not because he was cruel, but because he was always too busy to notice the accumulated effect of his own absence. Indifference rarely presents itself as explicit rejection. It acts slowly, almost politely, leaving marks that no one points out but that don't heal. These people weren't hurt by harsh words or aggressive attitudes. They were hurt by absence, lack of response, lack of continuity, lack of presence when life got tough. Mercy wasn't denied with a no, it was dissolved in successive postponements. Each time he promised to talk later, visit later, listen later, something shifted. Later never came, and with it went the trust that that bond mattered. Constant absence teaches something very hard. It teaches that the suffering of others has no priority. He still remembers some of those faces, but vaguely. An interrupted conversation, an unanswered message, a request that went unanswered. Others he has forgotten completely, not out of malice, but because indifference also erases. It transforms people into vague, almost abstract memories. And this is perhaps the most silent effect of a lack of mercy, the progressive dehumanization of the other. When one is not present, the other ceases to be a concrete person and becomes merely a distant idea. These wounds don't scream. They manifest as withdrawal, as silence, as polite distancing. Those who have been ignored quickly learn not to ask again. They learn not to bother, not to insist, not to expect. and so without realizing it, they become someone from whom nothing is expected. This doesn't generate conflict, but it generates loneliness all around. A loneliness populated by people who passed by, tried, and gave up. The impact of this is profound, though invisible. The absence of mercy doesn't create dramatic scenes, it creates voids. Voids in relationships, in memories, in possibilities that never came to fruition. Each person left behind took with them an opportunity for encounter, for learning, for mutual transformation. None of this was experienced because it seemed too small, too simple, too irrelevant to warrant effort. But it is precisely in these simple gestures that mercy reveals itself. And when they are lacking, the damage spreads silently. He never saw himself as someone who hurts others, and perhaps that's what makes it all the more serious. Because the harm caused by indifference leaves no clear culprits. There's no apology, no reparation, no final conversation. There's only a growing distance, a naturalized estrangement. People didn't leave angry, they left tired. Tired of waiting, of trying, of justifying his absence for too long. What's most unsettling is realizing that these people still exist. They went on with their lives, carrying scars he never knew about. Some closed themselves off, others hardened. Others simply learned not to rely on anyone. His absence was just one among many, but it contributed. Mercy not practiced never remains neutral. It always leaves a trace, even when no one points it out. On some level, he sensed that something was wrong. A vague feeling that relationships were falling apart easily, that bonds weren't deepening, that people weren't staying. But he interpreted this as a characteristic of modern life, as a sign of maturity, as a natural selection of who really mattered, never as a consequence of his own emotional unavailability. Thus, the pattern repeated itself, unquestioned. Now when these forgotten faces begin to reappear in memory, not as accusation, but as an absent presence, something stirs within. It's not explicit guilt, it's discomfort. The realization that many wounds were not caused by wrong actions, but by the lack of right actions, by the mercy that never manifested itself, by the care that remained only an intention. If you can visualize any of these faces in your own story, write something simple in the comments, like, "Someone was left behind," "silent wounds," or "I was absent." These words don't conclude anything. They only mark the exact point where we are, because the story continues precisely from this invisible impact, this heavy silence, this uncomfortable feeling that absence will also be considered when everything comes to light. He repeated to himself, like a silent mantra, that he had never done evil. This phrase functioned as a seal of moral approval, something that ended any questioning before it even began. He had never deliberately hurt anyone, never openly humiliated anyone, never caused visible harm. Within this criterion, he felt safe. His conscience rested on this minimal comparison, where evil only existed when it was explicit, aggressive, undeniable. Everything outside of that seemed neutral, acceptable, too irrelevant to be examined in depth. The idea of always having been correct reinforced this security. Correct in his punctuality, correct in his words, correct in his social behavior. He followed rules, respected limits, adhered to general principles. This created a solid image of personal integrity. When someone pointed out absence, coldness, or indifference, he didn't recognize himself in that. In his internal logic, correctness was enough. And it was enough because being correct with oneself was much simpler than being merciful to others. This is where moral self-deception elegantly takes hold. He didn't need to lie consciously. He simply needed to select the right criteria. If evil is only that which directly hurts, then everything else falls outside the realm of evaluation. Good, in turn, was defined as not causing problems, not creating conflicts, not overstepping boundaries. Thus, he saw himself as someone just, balanced, and upright. But justice focused only on oneself does not produce mercy. It only produces personal tranquility. He evaluated his actions by the impact they had on his own image, not by the real effect on the other person. If he slept peacefully, everything was resolved. If he didn't feel explicit guilt, it was a sign that he had acted correctly. This logic creates a self-centered morality where the final criterion is always internal. The other person appears only as a secondary reference, never as the main measure. And when that happens, mercy becomes optional, almost decorative. On many occasions, he noticed that someone had left hurt, withdrawn, silent, but he would quickly defend himself with the same phrase, "I." never did anything wrong. As if evil only existed in declared intent and not also in repeated absence, prolonged coldness, constant disinterest. He confused innocence with impartiality. He confused correctness with compassion. He confused personal justice with lived love. Being fair to oneself is comfortable. It allows for explanations, justifications, coherent narratives. Being merciful to others is different. It requires shifting perspectives, stepping outside the center, looking beyond one's own logic. Mercy doesn't just ask if you did something wrong, but if you did something necessary. And that was the question he avoided, because it didn't fit within the moral framework he had built. Self-deception also fed on comparisons. He saw himself as better than many, more educated, more controlled, more aware. This reinforced the feeling of being on the right side. When compared to extremes, anyone seems righteous. But mercy is not born from comparison. It is born from encounter. And encounter requires emotional presence, something he always kept under strict control. The phrase, "I've always been right," functioned as a premature closure of conscience. There was no room for deeper reflection, revision, or reassessment. Everything seemed resolved. But by closing that space, he also closed the possibility of real transformation. Because transformation begins when being right is no longer enough, when moral comfort is questioned, when conscience realizes that following rules doesn't replace caring for people. This kind of self-deception doesn't generate intense guilt, it generates stagnation. Nothing changes because technically nothing is wrong. Life goes on organized, clean, predictable, but something essential is missing. A deeper humanity, a less defensive sensitivity, a real willingness to be affected. He remained fair to himself, but distant from the suffering of others, and he called that balance. Perhaps this is where the difference begins to reveal itself more clearly. Personal justice keeps one's own image intact. Mercy towards others involves risk, strain, discomfort. One protects, the other transforms. He chose the first and believed that was enough. He didn't realize that in doing so, he was reducing faith, love, and ethics to a system of self-protection. If at any point you've used phrases like, "I never did wrong," or "I was always right," to silence an inner unease, write in the comments something like, "Fair enough for me," "I was right," but absent, or simply moral self-deception. These words don't close anything, they only open the space where we move forward, because it is precisely from this point that the next layer begins to move, without relief, without absolution, with the conscience still in a state of wakefulness. At some point, something began to become uncomfortably clear. Mercy wasn't what he felt in specific moments, nor that fleeting emotion that arose when he heard a sad story. It wasn't momentary compassion, nor silent empathy that ends with discomfort. Mercy, he began to realize, had always been a choice, and choice implies conscious decision. It implies stepping out of autopilot. It implies acting even when there is no desire, even when there is no emotional return, even when the cost is real. For a long time, he confused mercy with feeling. He thought that if he felt something for the other person, that was enough. A tightness in his chest, a discreet pity, a quick thought saying, "What a difficult situation." But these feelings never turned into action. They remained there, contained, locked inside him. The emotion served more to ease his own conscience than to alleviate someone else's pain. He felt, but he didn't act, and that seemed sufficient because no one saw what was happening inside. Gradually, it became evident that mercy does not depend on emotion. Often it happens precisely when there is no emotion at all, when there is no will, when there is no affinity, when there is no energy. Mercy appears when someone chooses to be present despite this, when they choose to act even without feeling. He realized that he had always waited to feel something special before acting, and since that feeling almost never came, there was almost never any action. He also realized that intention was never the problem. He always had good intentions. He thought about helping. He thought about calling. He thought about reaching out. Thinking became a comfortable substitute for doing. Intention functioned as an internal promise that never needed to be fulfilled. As long as the intention existed, he felt good. There was no urgency, no pressure, no concrete responsibility. But mercy doesn't feed on intentions. It thrives on presence. Presence is staying when it would be easier to leave. It's listening when it would be more comfortable to end the conversation. It's remaining when there are no ready answers, when there are no quick solutions, when there is no control. He always avoided that place. He preferred to keep his distance to conserve energy, to protect his own emotional stability, and he called that balance. Only now has he begun to understand that, often, this balance was merely the easiest path disguised as wisdom. There was a specific moment, difficult to pinpoint in time, when this perception formed more strongly. It wasn't a dramatic shock, but an accumulation, a collection of memories, faces, silences, and repeated choices. He realized that, faced with almost every important fork in the road, he chose the path that required the least. Less effort, less risk, less wear and tear, less involvement. There was always a plausible justification. There was always an acceptable explanation, but the pattern was clear. Choosing the easy way out didn't seem wrong while it was happening. It seemed sensible, logical, prudent, but seen from afar, it formed a trajectory of absence, a life where mercy was admired but rarely practiced, where faith was defended but rarely embodied, where love was affirmed but rarely lived. He didn't deny these values, he just didn't put them into action when it cost him something. This realization did not bring relief. It brought weight, a weight different from immediate guilt, a deeper, more silent weight. Consciousness began to show that mercy was never about feeling more, but about choosing differently, choosing to be present, choosing to get involved, choosing to leave the comfortable position of the righteous spectator. He realized that there had always been a choice. It was never a lack of opportunity. It was a repeated decision, and perhaps the hardest part was admitting that many times he knew exactly what needed to be done. I knew I should call, come back, insist, stay, but I chose not to. I chose silence, postponement, distance, not out of malice, but out of convenience. Mercy demands crossing that point. It demands going beyond what is easy, beyond what is pleasant, beyond what preserves one's own image intact. Now, this distinction between feeling and choosing is beginning to take shape, between intention and presence, between discourse and action. Nothing has been resolved yet. Nothing has been repaired. It has only become clear that the path chosen so far has been, most of the time, the simplest one. And this clarity does not accuse, but exposes. It does not condemn, but reveals. It is uncomfortable because it can no longer be ignored. If this idea resonated with you, write something like mercy as a choice, I stayed with the intention, or I chose the easiest path in the comments. These words don't close the reflection. They only mark the exact point where we are now, because it is from this perception that something begins to move, still without an answer, still without rest, still demanding a next step that will not be comfortable. The judgment presented here does not come as an isolated event, nor as a list of specific failures. It does not highlight a particular moment, a wrong choice, a serious error that could be pointed out and resolved with quick regret. What is revealed is a pattern, a logic repeated over time, applied with almost invisible consistency. It was not a stumble, it was a path. It was not a slip, it was a direction carefully maintained. And this changes everything, because patterns are not explained by momentary excuses. They are sustained by accumulated decisions. He begins to realize that his entire life has followed the same internal structure. Whenever there was tension between acting and preserving comfort, he chose to preserve. Whenever there was a conflict between presence and self-protection, he chose to withdraw. Whenever mercy required continuous effort, he opted for the minimal gesture or polite absence. Not once or twice, but almost always. Judgment doesn't point out what he did wrong. It points out what he always did the same way. Repetition transforms small choices into identity. This recognition is weighty because it doesn't allow for emotional shortcuts. It's impossible to say it was an exception, that it was circumstantial, that it happened during a difficult period. The logic remained consistent across different phases of life, with different people in distinct contexts. The faces changed, the situations changed, but the internal response was the same. Distance, prudence, justification, silence. The judgment reveals this internal consistency that he never wanted to examine. A consistency that seemed like a virtue, but which now reveals itself as rigidity disguised as balance. The weight of repetition doesn't come with shouts or accusations. It comes as a calm and relentless realization, a sequence of scenes that connect, forming a clear narrative. He sees that he wasn't prevented from acting, wasn't blocked, wasn't incapacitated. He simply chose not to get involved, repeatedly, with different arguments, but with the same conclusion. The judgment doesn't discuss intention, It observes the trajectory, and the trajectory always points to the same place. There is something deeply disconcerting about this, because he always believed he was making conscious, thoughtful, mature choices. Now he realizes he was merely repeating a comfortable logic without ever questioning it. Repetition creates normality. What is repeated ceases to seem like a choice and begins to seem like nature. He started saying, "I am like this," when in reality, he was only reaffirming old decisions. The judgment reveals that what seemed like identity was an unquestioned moral habit. Each isolated omission seemed small, each postponement seemed harmless, but the weight of repetition transforms the small into structure, an entire life organized to avoid the cost of mercy, an entire faith adjusted to not demand sacrifice, an entire love kept in the realm of discourse. Judgment does not add up errors, it reveals direction, and the direction was always the same: predictable, safe, distant. This revelation also dismantles the idea of neutrality. He realizes that there is no neutral position when it comes to mercy. Repeating the absence is not sitting on the fence, it is choosing a side, a comfortable but real side. The judgment shows that time does not erase patterns, it consolidates them. The more a logic is repeated, the harder it is to deny it. One's entire life becomes evidence. The hardest part isn't recognizing a mistake, it's recognizing a pattern that has persisted for years without internal resistance. It's realizing that the same phrases, the same justifications, the same decisions were repeated until they became automatic. Judgment isn't enough to punish, it's enough to reveal the complete picture. And faced with this picture, there's no way to claim surprise. Everything was there, visible, coherent, continuous. This moment doesn't conclude anything. It merely exposes the logic that guided each step. The weight of repetition remains suspended because there has been no response yet, no different movement, only the uncomfortable clarity that an entire life can be judged not by one great mistake, but by constant fidelity to an easy path. If this makes sense to you, write something like "it was a pattern," always the same logic, or "the weight of repetition" in the comments. These words don't explain, they only acknowledge, because it is precisely from this acknowledgement that we proceed, with our consciousness now, prevented from pretending not to have seen. When the moment finally arrives that he begs for mercy, there is no revolt, no arrogance. There is an almost automatic plea learned throughout his life. He asks for understanding as one who has always believed he would be understood. He asks for explanation as one who hopes that everything will make sense in the end. He doesn't shout, he doesn't protest, he doesn't accuse. He simply presents his own narrative calmly, like someone who trusts he will be heard because he has always considered himself right. The plea arises more from habit than from conscience. He asks because he has always believed that asking would be enough. At that moment, he mentally revisits everything he has built as an identity. The faith he professed, the words he defended, the image of someone balanced, just, centered. He hopes that this will weigh in his favor. He hopes that intention will count, that feeling will count, that discourse will count. There is a silent expectation that someone will explain, detail, translate, as if judgment were a rational debate, as if there were room for argumentation, as if everything could be resolved with intellectual clarity. But what you find is not confrontation, it is emptiness. Not an aggressive emptiness, but a revealing emptiness, a space where words cannot stand on their own, where declared faith does not automatically translate into received mercy, where the request meets silence, not because it is not heard, but because there is nothing to answer beyond what has already been experienced. He begins to understand that what is being considered is not the explanations he now seeks, but the choices he repeated when there was still time to choose differently. He realizes that he has asked for mercy many times throughout his life, but almost always for himself. He asked for understanding for his limitations, patience for his failures, tolerance for his absences. Now he realizes that he never practiced this as a rule, only as an exception. The emptiness he finds is not punishment, it is coherence. There is no contradiction between what he lived and what now presents itself. There is correspondence, and this correspondence is disconcerting because it leaves no room for surprise. At this point, something clicks inside. He understands that the problem was never the faith he claimed to have. It was never the belief, nor the words, nor the declared values. What was lacking was practice, constant practice. Costly practice, repeated practice, mercy that transcends weariness, that persists despite discomfort, that chooses presence when it would be easier to be absent. He realizes that he believed his whole life that faith replaced practice, when in fact, practice is the only place where faith becomes real. The request for an explanation loses its force because everything begins to explain itself. There is no complex mystery, no hidden detail. There is a direct line between what was chosen and what is, now revealed. He understands that he is not being judged for not having believed enough, but for having believed without acting, for having used faith as a shield, as discourse, as a moral tranquilizer. The emptiness he finds is the space where the gestures, the presences, the different choices should be. This understanding doesn't come as an external accusation, but as an internal recognition. He realizes that he always asked for mercy as a right, never as a responsibility. He expected to receive it at the end without having exercised it along the way. And now he understands that mercy is not something that is demanded, it is something that is built. It is not born from the request, it is born from daily practice. The void doesn't answer, because it doesn't need to answer. It only shows what hasn't been placed there over time. This moment doesn't end the story, but it completely changes the perspective. He understands that judgment doesn't discuss belief, it observes coherence. It doesn't analyze discourse, it reveals trajectory. It doesn't evaluate emotion, it exposes choices. The plea for mercy finds emptiness because that emptiness was cultivated little by little whenever the practice was postponed, avoided, rationalized. None of this is said in words, but everything is understood with uncomfortable clarity. If this resonates with you, write something like lack of practice, I used faith as a shield, or the request fell on deaf ears in the comments. These words don't explain or resolve anything. They only mark this exact point in the story, because this is where we move forward, with this understanding still open, still heavy, still demanding something that can no longer be ignored. The question now lingering in the minds of those watching is not posed as an accusation, but as a mirror. It doesn't demand an immediate answer, because it wasn't meant to be resolved quickly. It seeps in slowly, dismantling old certainties, touching places that tend to remain protected. What if trusting in mercy isn't the same as experiencing it? This idea begins to circulate internally, creating a silent discomfort, because many have learned to rest in belief without ever testing that belief in daily practice. Trust always seemed enough. Trust sounds safe, spiritual, right? It gives the feeling of being on the right side, even when nothing changes. But living mercy is different. Living involves risk, involves exposure, involves losing control of one's own narrative. And that's exactly where the question begins to weigh heavily. How many times has trust been used as a substitute for action? How many times has faith been used as a final argument to avoid the discomfort of real involvement? What if the judgment isn't about what you believed, but about how you treated people along the way? Not in exceptional moments, not in extreme situations, but in the repeated daily routine, in simple encounters, in small opportunities for care. This question shifts everything, because it takes the focus away from the inner self and places it on the relationship, not on what you felt, but on what the other person received, not on what you thought, but on what was experienced around you. It's unsettling, because it dismantles the idea that having a good heart is enough. A good heart that never translates into action remains invisible to those who suffer. A good heart that doesn't move, doesn't alter destinies. This question is poignant, because it reveals that often the problem wasn't a lack of faith, but an excess of distance. It wasn't disbelief, but absence. It wasn't malice, but organized, justified, rationalized indifference. And then the third layer emerges, perhaps the most difficult, where you have expected mercy without offering it, where you have awaited understanding, patience, tolerance, while distributing demands, coldness, or silence, where you position yourself as someone who deserves to be understood, but rarely make yourself available to understand. This question doesn't point to a single moment. It spans an entire life, revisiting old relationships, interrupted stories, people who have been left behind. She doesn't accuse, but reveals patterns. She reveals that mercy is often expected as a right, not as a consequence, as something guaranteed in the end, not as something built along the way. She reveals that acceptance is requested while distance is offered, that explanations are desired while listening is refused. That patience is expected while impatience disguised as maturity is lived. This question resonates with the viewer because it doesn't allow for generic answers. It demands specific context. Where exactly? With whom exactly? In what situations? It's impossible to answer by talking about humanity in general. It asks for concrete examples, even if no one else knows them. It demands inner honesty. It demands the courage to look without softening the blow, without defending oneself too quickly. Perhaps that's why it remains suspended, because there is still no answer. There is only the awareness that trusting is not the same as living, that believing is not the same as practicing, that speaking of mercy is not the same as choosing it when it costs something. This realization does not bring immediate relief, but it brings clarity, and clarity when it arrives can no longer be ignored. If this question truly resonated with you, write something in the comments that highlights this point, such as "Where did I fail?" "I waited without offering." "This got to me." Or "I need to reconsider my choices." This isn't a response for others. It's an internal record of the moment when the question ceased to be abstract and became personal. Because that's exactly where we're going from here, with this open restlessness, without conclusion, without closure, with our consciousness now too awake to pretend we didn't hear. Along this path, what was revealed was not a single great mistake, nor an explicit act of malice, but an entire logic of life. A faith used as a shield, a mercy always expected and rarely practiced, repeated choices for the easiest path, for elegant absence, for justified omission. We saw that trusting in mercy is not the same as living it, that believing does not replace acting, and that judgment does not reveal speeches but patterns. What matters is not what was said, but what was done, and above all, what was left undone when there was a choice. The question that remains is not about religion, nor about spiritual knowledge, but about daily practice, real presence, and silent responsibility. Because in the end, it is not declared faith that sustains life, but the mercy lived in encounters, in simple gestures, in the people who crossed our path. If you've stayed this far, write a sentence in the comments that represents what this video awakened in you. It could be, "Mercy is a choice. I waited without offering. I was correct, but absent." Or simply, "I understood." This comment isn't for me, it's for you to mark this moment of awareness. If this reflection resonated with you, stay tuned to the channel, subscribe, to continue reflecting on consciousness, lived faith, and choices that truly transform life. And then move on to the next video, which is already appearing on the screen, because it continues exactly from this point, where the question is still open and the answer begins to demand something real.